Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to be recognized by you to address you here on the floor of the United States House of Representatives. And I came to this floor this evening to take up a topic that I think is essential to the future of our country, for our moral foundation. And yet, as I've listened to the gentleman from Maryland's presentation, there are a few minutes I'd like to spend with the other perspective before I move into the topic that I came to address. And I'd go back as far as the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, who used a reference. She said that binding precedent, that stare decisis is binding precedent. Well, Mr. Speaker, I want the American people to know that stare decisis is the Latin term, a legal term that means that once a case is decided, it deserves deference. It's already been decided. It deserves deference. But it's never been a binding precedent. There have been a number of times that the Supreme Court has turned 180 degrees on what the gentlelady from Texas has called a binding precedent. And I could go through a list of those, Mr. Speaker, but I think it's important to note that accepting a decision of a previous Supreme Court as if somehow it were binding precedent and then settled law and then incorporated into the Constitution itself would be a very erroneous concept to carry into the Supreme Court itself, because we have to go back and evaluate that these were mortals that made the decision in the Supreme Court and the other courts, and they aren't always right. And if a case is not soundly reasoned, it needs to be reconsidered. And so I appreciate Justice Thomas, Clarence Thomas' view on stare decisis. Essentially, it doesn't exist. That if you want to evaluate the reasoning of a previous court, that's a good thing to do, because they've already thought it through. They've already written on it. There are already opinions and dissents that are generally written. And yet, to be bound by that really handcuffs then the future decisions. So it's worth looking at the decisions of the previous court, but we can never be bound by them. And I take issue with the gentlelady from Texas' position that stare decisis is binding precedent. Never. It's never binding precedent. It's an indicator and it's informative. But we have to go back to the text of the Constitution and the various amendments, and we have to understand what they were understood to mean at the time of ratification. Otherwise, the Constitution no longer is a guarantee from generation to generation. It's just simply an artifact of history that allows the justices to hold up and say, hey, we're bound by stare decisis. We can only make a decision that narrows things down, and we're essentially trapped into a funnel of reason that brings about a predictable conclusion that might be completely erroneous. And to give an example, Mr. Speaker, I would say that the series of decisions that were made by the Supreme Court, and the first one I would start with, and I'm going to get to abortion in this decision, Griswold versus Connecticut. In the early 60s, the court had a case before them where the state of Connecticut had banned contraceptives, not just contraceptives in the school, as one might say today, but contraceptives that would be used in marriages. And so there was a case, Griswold took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was a right to privacy of married couples to be able to purchase contraceptives. And the reasoning, there's no right to privacy that's stipulated in the Constitution, but it was a decision that was made by the Supreme Court that if respected as stare decisis, now the next court would be bound by it. And the next court was. And so the Supreme Court ruled that Connecticut couldn't ban contraceptive couples because they had a right to privacy to purchase those, as illogical as it sounds, even as I say it, Mr. Speaker. As illogical as it sounds, married couples had a constitutional right decided by Griswold versus Connecticut to purchase contraceptives within the state of Connecticut and the nation, as the decision turned out. Well, that decision didn't flow over into unmarried couples. So unmarried couples went to court and they sued. And it became the Eisenstadt decision, which concluded that any rights that are bestowed upon married couples with regard to right to privacy and purchasing contraceptives also must be available to non-married couples who might be cohabiting or having a relationship in whatever way, and they should be able to purchase contraceptives too. So this right to privacy, established by Griswold, expanded by Eisenstadt. Now, see how this is bringing us down to an irreversible conclusion, Mr. Speaker? This right to privacy was then argued before the court in 1973 in Roe versus Wade. And the Supreme Court of the United States concluded in the emanations and penumbras that there was this right to privacy that extended to abortion itself. And so when I hear the gentlelady from Texas say binding precedent, stare decisis is binding precedent, if we're going to accept as binding precedent that there is a court-manufactured right to privacy, and Griswold, reinforced by Eisenstadt, that is the foundation for the irrational, illogical, and unconstitutional reasoning that has brought about the abortion of 5.5 million babies since 1973. And all because a court chased the rationale down a narrower and narrower path that they were bound to make decisions only on the judgment of the previous court, and it left very little of the Constitution to be reviewed. If we would have had 9 Justice Thomases on that court, they would have concluded this, and that first, the precedents didn't count. Eisenstadt, look at it if you like, look at the reasoning if you like, but they're not bound by it. Griswold versus Connecticut, not bound by it. And the case of Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton, I might add, the combination of those two cases together gave abortion on demand in America for any reason or no reason at all, for an irrational foundation that began with a stare decisis view that came from an activist court that I believe wanted to come to that conclusion anyway. I think they believed that society was moving along and that society was going to get to the place where they supported abortion. They just thought they would just go ahead and beat the Congress to the punch, or beat the state legislatures to the punch and impose a right to abortion on America, and that is what they did. And we saw this happen in our country. We saw this happen in different places around the world, and now it's still being pushed in some of the countries in the world. And Mr. Speaker, if there's anybody listening from the nation of Chile, I would suggest to them, back away from that push to legalize abortion in your country. We've seen what has happened in America. 20% of the pregnancies in America now end in abortion. And the death toll of the bell that would ring for 58.5 million babies that have been aborted since 1973. It's a missing component of 2 going on 3 generations. And those little babies today, Mr. Speaker, had they been given that right to life that is guaranteed to any born person in the United States, if we catch someone, if someone commits mass murder in the United States of America, mass serial murder in the United States of America, mass serial murder in multiple locations in multiple states in a ghastly and ghoulish and bloodthirsty way, we take them to court, and we just say, you're innocent until proven guilty. You may have, and by my description, committed capital crimes. Capital crimes that would be facing the death penalty. Federal murder it might be in multiple states that have the death penalty. No matter how ghastly a murderer we have, we give that murderer first the presumption of innocence, innocent until proven guilty. We give them an opportunity to be tried by a jury of their peers. They are sometimes tried in the court of public opinion on top of it. And if they don't have their due process, and often it's concluded by a judge along the way that they don't, they can appeal their death penalty all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States. All the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. Why? Because they have a right to life, because they are deemed and legally are a person, not only in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of American law. In the eyes of American law, the most ghastly murderer that I can describe has a right to life and a right to due process until such time as the full appeals all the way up the board have been heard, and then it must be, if they are sentenced to death, then it must be the most merciful death that we can possibly devise in this country, or the judges will rule that it's unconstitutional and cruel and inhuman punishment. That's how we treat the most ghastly murderers in America. But the most innocent among us, those 58.5 million little babies that are there curled up in an innocent with little fingers and little toes, hands and eyes and nose and ears. And not just that, and a mouth. No teeth yet. But that mouth has an expression on it. It smiles, it frowns, it twists itself around. Those babies can feel pain. And they can put their hands together and they can move around. And the expressions on their faces, we now see them through 4D ultrasound. And mother after mother, father after father, grandparents, brothers, sisters, uncles they are, even before the baby is born, they bond with that little baby through the ultrasound. We know, we've always known, the Catholic Church has always known, and so have many of the other Christian organizations and other entities around this country and the world. We've always known that that baby's life began at the moment of conception. But if you look at our society, we don't have a lot of sympathy as our society is concerned for those beings that can't scream for their own mercy. That baby's silent. The baby can't cry out from the womb. The ring of that baby's cries doesn't echo in our ears. We turn our mind away from it. We turn our eyes away from it. And we listen to people say, well, it's choice. Well, the baby's never given the choice. This little baby that could be the next Einstein, the next Lincoln, the next Ronald Reagan, the next Billy Graham. How many of those gifts to the world are in that guilt, that mountain of guilt that's poured upon the United States of America that numbers now over 58.5 million? That's an answer. We'll never know the answer to that question, Mr. Speaker. We'll never know. But we cry out to the conscience of the American people, the conscience that now knows, because especially knows that that baby's life begins at the moment of conception, and science can prove it when we can detect a heartbeat. When we can detect a heartbeat, we know that's life. And we know that it's innocent human life. And for the purposes of the law today, it's innocent unborn human life not protected by law, not even close to the first protection we offer the most heinous murderer that we can devise. And yet they're the most innocent. I remember Father Jonathan Morris was speaking one day, and as I was watching him in the morning, and he was talking about the ladies in the church. When a baby cries, they pick the baby up and they go outside the church in order to get that baby away from the cries, or get that baby's cries away from the congregation so the rest of them can hear the sermon. And he said it doesn't bother him when there are babies crying in his church, because those are the only innocent voices in that church, the voice of babies. The most innocent that we encounter are actually in the womb, not yet born, not yet with an opportunity to fill their lungs full of air and scream for their own mercy. We have to speak for them. We have to defend them. We have to protect them. And we know by our conscience, we know by our science, we know by natural law, we know by what's innate within us and our intuition that life has to begin at a moment. At a moment. You can't take a life by accident. If there's going to be an error, it must be on the side of life. And I know that when I was able to hold our firstborn, and I looked at him and there was an aura about him, I was so amazed that that miracle was in my hands. And that was an extension into another generation from the long line of families that we all have and share and enjoy. And I looked at him and I thought, could anybody take this little baby's life now? Now that he's here, now that he's minutes old? Could anybody take his life now? Of course they could not. Well, some can. And we do our best to lock them up or send them into the next life. But to take the life of a newly born baby is one of the most ghoulish things that I can think of. And so I thought, this little life is sacred. I know there's a soul in him. I know there is. And so could anyone take his life the minute before he was born? Is he any different? What transformed him as he came through the birth canal? He's not transformed. He's the same baby. He could be born by cesarean. His life is as sacred, and he's as unique and as much created in God's image, and as much has a soul within him, born by cesarean, as if he comes through the birth canal. And so, could anybody take his life the minute before he was born? Or an hour, or a day, or a week, or a month, or a trimester, or 2 or 3? What transforms this child through that period of time that I've described as 9 months? What transforms them? And so if you think back through from the minute before a little boy or an innocent little baby girl is born, to the hour, the week, the hour, the day, the week, the month, the trimester, there's no dramatic moment from the moment of conception. Because conception is the dramatic moment. It is the instant, the moment that life begins. And at that moment, if God doesn't already put the soul in that little baby, I'm completely convinced that it happens at that moment of conception when the genetics of the father and the mother are joined together and a unique being is begun that has such a robust growth that if we think of it in terms of the multiples of size from the fertilized egg until the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-pound baby is born. The dramatic growth that is there, that little baby has a soul in it from that moment. And that is human life. And it's nurturable, and it must be protected in law. And so what we have done is we've introduced the Heartbeat Bill here in the United States Congress. And we have 2.5 dozen or so co-sponsors on the bill. This is the first time that I know of that this legislation has been introduced in the United States Congress. But it protects the life of every little baby that has a heartbeat. And it requires that if any abortionist seeks to commit an abortion, that they first check for a heartbeat. That heartbeat can be discovered as early as 16 days from the moment of conception. I'd like to have a bill that protected life from the moment of conception, and I would support such a thing. But we can't scientifically prove conception, but we can scientifically prove heartbeat. And everybody knows, every mother knows, every father knows, every human being knows that if a heart is beating, there is life. And you can't describe this life as anything other than human life. And it's human life, it's innocent life, nothing more innocent than a conceived little baby. And we need to protect human life in all of its forms, from conception to natural death. And this bill, the Heartbeat Protection Act of 2017, protects those babies. The moment their heartbeat can be detected, the baby is protected. And if an abortionist is determined or decides to commit an abortion, they must first check for a heartbeat under this law. And they must keep the records to demonstrate that they have done so. And if they fail to do so, they would be facing a federal penalty of a fine, imprisonment up to 5 years. The mother's not penalized in this. She's not subjected to this. It's the abortionists that are subjected to this statute. And I would reiterate, if a heartbeat is detected, the baby is protected. And Mr. Speaker, some people will be wondering, and they'll be wondering, well, what kind of support does legislation like that have across the United States of America? And so we have a poll here that is on this easel. And this is the question about the Heartbeat Bill, H.R. 490. And we went to over 1,000 adults in America and asked for their opinions. And those 1,002 interviews were conducted, as a matter of fact. And this has a sampling error that is about as small as you get in a legitimate poll. Sometimes you'll see them in 5.5% or more, but this is down to a little over 3% accuracy. And it's this, that do you agree or disagree or have no opinion on supporting the Heartbeat Bill that would outlaw abortion in America, unless, if a heartbeat can be detected, it would outlaw abortion unless there was a physical threat to the health or the physical life or health of the mother. 69% of Americans agree with this legislation. That's across the spectrum. It's across the board, Mr. Speaker. That includes Democrats, no party, independents, and Republicans. And it includes it in the 13 that disagreed are 18% over here in the orange, Mr. Speaker. So we're here with 69% of Americans that support legislation that would protect innocent, unborn human life from the moment that a heartbeat can be detected. Because we know that life is precious, and every one of those lives contributes to the well-being of humanity. No matter what kind of life we may think they experience, they're a blessing to their father, they're a blessing to their mother, they're a blessing to their family, they're a blessing to this country. And I would point out, Mr. Speaker, that when you break this down, 69% in favor that support the heartbeat bill, H.R. 490, only 18% oppose, and I think some of them will do that for political reasons, but they'd have a hard time making the argument if they're looking in the eye of someone who has survived an abortion. I've never heard one of the pro-abortion people look at one of the survivors of abortion and say, you should have never been born. No one does that. They don't have the nerve to do so because they know that each one of us contributes to the well-being of society, and each one of us are a gift from God. And his gift to us are the tools that we are born with, and our job is to develop them and utilize them for the well-being of everyone else. Here's the breakdown politically. 86% of Republicans support the heartbeat bill. Only 6% of Republicans disagree. I don't know why they do, but 6% do. I don't know what their argument is. In the center, we have the graph of the Democrats. 55% of Democrats. They're the ones that would be lined up against this, I would think. But it is a significant majority. In fact, if this were a political election, Mr. Speaker, that would be a landslide at 55% of Democrats support the heartbeat bill. Now we're looking for some Democrats to sign on it. Maybe they'll reflect the will and wishes of their constituents. 55% of Democrats support the heartbeat bill, 25% oppose. More, and those who, 55% support and 20% oppose. The undecided are in orange. That's 25%. So it's well over 2 to 1, 2.5, and almost actually bordering on 3 to 1 support among the Democrats for this. And if you go to the independents, 61% of independents support the heartbeat bill, and 13% of the independents oppose, and 27% of the Democrats. So 61% support among independents, and 55% support among Democrats, 86% support among Republicans. That's the party breakdown for those who think of this in politics. I think of this in human terms, Mr. Speaker. I think of this in terms of picking up little babies and holding them in my arms and feeling that love and that special smell that a little baby has, and the gurgle, the laughter, and the crying. It's all part of life. When I think of the privilege of being able to go to church with almost my whole family, and taking up, well, I guess last Sunday parts of 3 pews and not all of all 3. And I think of this little baby that got passed back to me, and he's kind of a in-law shirt-tail relation. I'd never held him before. He snuggled up in my arms there at the end of Mass, and I was able to carry him out. And we have also little children that come out of the pews to run up front at the beginning of the collection to carry their dollar bill up and put it in that basket. They're being raised right. Those little kids, they will be fine. But I see them bubbling out of the pews and pouring down the aisle and lining up there, and sometimes they trip and run at each other and knock each other down and help each other up, and little big brother or sister will go help the little 2-year-old back again. And when you see that joy and you hear that gurgling laughter, 58.5 million babies never had a chance to even do that, never had a chance to learn, to love, to laugh, to play, to fall in love, to have their own children, to feel that joy of family, to experience this life in this wonderful country that we have. All denied them because the Supreme Court came down with a ruling that said, well, stare decisis, the right to privacy, the extended right to privacy, in the emanations and penumbras of the Constitution is a decision that they would support abortion on demand. Well, we know that the court has also left room, and we'll have a new court soon. The court has left room for us to make this argument before the court. And if anyone should stand up and say that we shouldn't move this legislation to save the lives of the next 58.5 million babies because a court might rule it unconstitutional, my challenge back to the court, Mr. Speaker, is it was an erroneous decision in Roe versus Wade. It was erroneous in Eisenstadt. It was erroneous in Griswold. And it was erroneous in Doe versus Bolton. And all of those together bound up. Don't be hiding behind stare decisis, Supreme Court. Let's look at this right to life that we have and the right to equal protection under the law that's guaranteed to us in the 14th Amendment and that is extended out to all the states. And if we can't execute the most heinous murderer without a due process all the way to the Supreme Court and then do so in the most painless and merciful way possible while babies are being torn apart in the womb, then what have we come to as a nation? We have a chance to rectify this, Mr. Speaker. We have an opportunity to move the heartbeat bill, an opportunity to send a message from the Senate and to all of America, and Americans have an opportunity to weigh into us, to sign on to this bill, to move this, to save the lives of all of the babies that are born that have a heartbeat. If a heartbeat is protected, if a heartbeat is detected, the baby is protected. That needs to be our rallying cry across this country and across this land forever. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.